Thanks for joining us today on for this presentation that's part of our My Chicago River Day Summer Challenge series. I'm Adam Flickinger. I'm the Planning Director for Friends of the Chicago River. Just a little bit about my focus area as a planner for Friends. Some of the things that I work on are working with river edge developers, river edge development issues, advocating for the continuous Chicago River Trail system, conservation land use issues, open space protection, regional green infrastructure, related to stormwater planning and wildlife corridor connectivity. So there's some of the things that I'm involved in at Friends. And like I said, this is part of a series of presentations this summer that we're doing called the My Chicago River Day Summer Challenge. And this is really a replacement for our regular in-person event that we typically have every year, which is a single day, large scale volunteer event for river cleanup. And we weren't able to have that this year because of the pandemic, obviously. So we replaced it with a couple of smaller group activities, and we encourage you to participate in small group cleanups that you can organize yourselves. And we have a bunch of resources on our website for you to do that. And here are kind of some of the ways you can be involved in this activity this summer. So we definitely ask you to pledge your support by registering on our website for the summer challenge, and you can do that there. We have some safety guidelines to review to make sure you can do a safe cleanup in a small group with your neighbors or in your other social groups. We have a map where you can post photos, and then we definitely ask you to help us spread the word about this activity and where it is and what you can do. So please, find that on our website. I definitely want to thank our sponsors for this initiative and for the summer day, the Chicago River Summer Challenge. Without their support, none of this would be possible. So we really appreciate everyone who's contributed and it partners with us, especially this week. Our featured sponsor is Waste Management. Waste Management has been a great partner of Friends for a number of years and is a great supporter of our Chicago River Day event and some of our other litter free Chicago River activities and programs. So thank you to them, and we really appreciate their support for this presentation in particular. So the topic of today's presentation is called Envisioning and Creating a Blue-Green Corridor. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this guiding policy or vision that we have for the Blue-Green Corridor. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the issues that we think that this strategy can address in our city. And for our waterways. And then I'm going to talk about specifically 5 strategies that are related to the work that I do at Friends that that will help me illustrate kind of how Friends is working to implement this vision throughout the river system. So for those of you who might not know, Friends is a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to improve and protect the Chicago River system for people, plants, and animals. We're supported by many partners and volunteers and advocates, and we're continuously working to really make sure that the river system is accessible, clean, healthy, and that all those benefits are shared throughout the river system adjacent communities. So because I'm a planner, I'm really into maps. So I like to really understand how all the different parts of the river system are related to each other. So where we work and how we define what we call the Chicago and Calumet River system is a series of subwatersheds that include all the way up to Lake County, the 3 branches of the Upper North Branch and the tributaries in that area, through downtown, the North Shore Canal Channel, the main branch downtown, the south branch, Bubbly Creek, and then down into the southwest side to the Ship Canal and the Calumet River system and all the tributary streams and creeks to the south, including this area down here, which is the Thorn Creek watershed. So we know through our mapping that this entire area covers over 156 miles of waterways. And we also, through our public lands assessment map, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, we know that 75% of this area still remains to be natural shoreline. And there's a great opportunity through that mapping. We also understand that within a half mile of the river, there's over 37,000 acres of open space still remaining in the system. And also, there's many different communities that are part of these watersheds. So this map, you can see that it's not just the city of Chicago, which sometimes think because of our name, but really the Chicago River system touches many diverse communities all over the region, all the way down to the south suburbs and all the way up to the North Shore. I'm just gonna, I have a link here on to the map on our website where you can explore a little further these watersheds if you're interested. So here's just a couple of photos that show some of the diversity of that area. So we have areas downtown and then some of the things that especially Chicago residents might not picture, but there are amazingly beautiful natural and secluded areas of the river system as well when you venture a little bit further out. And it's also important that we keep in mind is that, you know, the river system touches a lot of diverse communities. These yellow areas shown in the map are the census tracts that touch these waterways. And in 2010, which is the most recent census that we can use for this data, there was about 1.6 million residents in those census areas. And I think it's interesting to kind of speculate what the 2020 census will tell us about these areas. I think it's definitely going to show a major population increase from some of the estimates that we've been seeing with the census that's going on right now. And friendly reminder, please fill out your census because it's very important. But just it's interesting to speculate where that population growth will occur. And will we see a change in the breakdown of the racial breakdown and the diversity of our waterway adjacent communities? And it's also important to Friends equally is the diversity of wildlife populations in this area. So throughout the river system, we know that there are more than 70 species of fish now in the river, which is a huge increase from when Friends of the Chicago River was started in the 1970s. There's over 300 species of birds. Many of those are endangered species, and an interesting study from MWRD found that there were over 900 individually identifiable species on their properties alone, and they're one of the large property owners in the river system. So we're going to try here. I was interested to just see from everyone that's participating today if we can bring up a poll question. I don't know, Tim, if that's possible.
It does not look like it's allowing me to bring up the poll question.
Okay, so we'll just move on from that. We'll skip that since it didn't work.
But it is a good question, and I think people can reflect on how close they live to it, and maybe we'll see that in the chat. You can enter that information in the chat room. If you think you live a mile within the river or a stream or a creek or more, so maybe people can contribute that way. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing. Many people don't realize how close they are. When you look at that map, especially, you can see that the river system touches many more areas than I think people understand. But it's definitely the hydrology of the region is one of those things that connects us all together. So Friends, I'm just going to give a quick overview then of Friends Blue-Green Corridor vision. The Blue-Green Corridor vision is envisioned as a network of green spaces, sustainable developments, which include healthy and equitable communities, and many layers of trails, connected open spaces, and then really one of the major goals is to improve and expand green space, biodiversity, plant cover, and to harness the multiple benefits of all those things together. And this is a term that's being used really throughout the world by planners and environmental activists to really explain a strategy for connecting the decisions that we make on land to the decisions that we make for waterways. So it's, in other words, it's really natural systems thinking. So you have to think about those things, two things together to really be successful. And I think, especially during the COVID pandemic, right now, we're seeing much greater need for connected open space in all areas of our city. And people are really looking for those opportunities in the dense urban core to experience nature. And those places really contribute to our long-term health as the community and also the resiliency. So you probably have heard of many of the challenges that we're facing in our communities related to flooding and public health issues and other challenges. But natural systems thinking in our city can really be one of the ways to address some of those issues. And there's also really a need for better environmental justice in the decisions we make for planning in our communities. There's been a lot of really kind of concerning articles in the news in the past few years about how, flooding and other environmental issues are really hurting our Black and Brown communities to a greater extent. And these are the same communities that are dealing with many, many other challenges. So there's a real need to do a better job in the future to figure out how to address these challenges head on. And we feel that a big part of that, of addressing those things, is to incorporate nature in a much larger role in our urban lives. So there's this concept called biophilia, which literally means the love for life and living things. But it's a broader idea that our cities really need to connect, find ways to connect people to nature because it has major public health benefits to do that. And many of our programs at Friends really are aimed at this idea. There's been some really interesting studies recently about this. So there's a professor or researcher at Northwestern that I just saw about the other day who's doing research into this Asian idea of forest bathing. And forest bathing is basically a form of therapy that doctors can prescribe, and it's you basically go out into a natural area and are guided through a very detailed form of observation of nature. And so the researcher at Northwestern is finding that the people who participate in that therapy are getting all sorts of mental health benefits, which were more widely known before, but they're also even getting physical benefits, such as being able to reduce your risk of diabetes by lowering your blood sugar. And really, really interesting things. So it's just, these studies are really just calling out and reinforcing the ideas that many people have for improving access to natural experiences in the core of our city. And the river is a great opportunity, as Friends knows, and we've always known that the river, as we envision it, can be resource for those types of experiences. And one way to do that is another kind of planning concept that's being talked about a lot in recently is called rewilding. Sorry. So the concept of rewilding is just that you can increase biodiversity in the city by creating wild places. And it's really in contrast to this idea that, you know, all of our parks need to be heavily manicured type places. We know that it's actually more beneficial on many more levels to have wild experiences in the city. And that can be created almost anywhere. And one example that I just recently experienced and I think is really interesting is there's this area out by Navy Pier that was recently built. I think it isn't that old. It was just, I think, in the last year or so. It was completed, but you can see that the front of this facility is a visitor center. It's a great piece of architecture, really exciting for people. It's a pretty paved area because it's very heavily trafficked for tourists. But then when you walk around the back, it's a whole nother experience in a very dense, heavily trafficked area. It's very quiet, it has very lushly vegetated, and it actually goes all the way up over the roof of the building. And they have beehives and they have incredible multi-level native plantings, pollinator garden, etc. And it's just an amazing experience. So to me, this just illustrates that if you can have this in one of the most, you know, one of the busiest tourist zones of the city, this quiet, beautiful place, you can pretty much do that anywhere. And there's a real economic argument to this as well, beyond the public health issues that I just talked about. Friends commissioned a report in partnership with the University of Wisconsin Whitewater that really dug deep into the issues related to protecting the blue-green corridor in our city and what that would do to the local economy and how those type of environmental improvements really support local economic stability and growth. And that full report is on our website if you're interested, and I'm happy to share that afterwards. So the way Friends thinks about all those things that I just talked about as far as benefits is that they all overlap. And this is the concept of the blue-green system, is that by thinking about all those things together with the river, so thinking about water quality as it relates to stormwater, and thinking about how recreational issues relate to trails, but that how trail systems can also be green systems in the city and provide habitat. We think about all those things overlapping so that you can really benefit in multiple ways by each project that you do. And so how we work to implement this vision. So we have this kind of bold approach and vision for this multi-level blue-green corridor is through our three focus areas of our programs. So at Friends, we group our activities into three areas: education and outreach, on-the-ground projects, and policy and planning. So policy and planning is really my focus area, so that's mostly what I'll talk about today. But I think you definitely, if you joined us for some of the other presentations with Mark and Maggie, you heard about our really hands-on projects to restore forest preserves and other areas with native plants. And we have a great diversity of programs under each one of those groups, and they all interrelate. So many of these programs overlap and work together and collaborate to advance, you know, Friends' strategic plan and our vision for the river in the future. So next, I'm just going to talk about 5 strategies that are related to my work specifically in policy and planning, and how each one of those things relates to our blue-green corridor vision. So the first one is conservation land use planning. And this, so this program is really aimed at making sensible land use decisions throughout the river system on land that will help contribute in the future to the success of a clean and accessible waterway. One way we've done that is we partnered with Arcadis, which is a multidisciplinary engineering firm, to create this data analysis tool called the Public Lands Assessment. And this is a geographic information systems map, GIS map, that contains all sorts of data about areas within a half mile of the river. And that's where this is the tool that was able to provide us with some of the really exciting statistics that were previously unknown that I shared at the beginning of the presentation, such as the 156 miles and the 75% remaining natural sloped area of the river system. So some of the things that went into this data tool, we used multiple layers of GIS data that we received from partners and from other sources, and then we kind of clipped and manipulated them into a filtered tool that was more concise about the area just within a half mile of the river. So we took into consideration things like land character, environmental things like soil and tree cover, things that related to stormwater, such as the soil types that are good for infiltration, and then also more people-focused things such as recreational access and amenities. And one of the things that we also created alongside the map was this data sheet that helps you can basically filter different areas and different parcels throughout the system and then understand all of their characteristics together. So it's been very useful for us in creating projects for the future. And this is also on our website, and I'm happy to share that towards the end of the presentation, the link. So we welcome and invite people to explore in the map and do different filtering and kind of explore the river system and everything there is to know about it. So the second strategy I'm going to talk about is our role in river edge development, and this is really an advisory role. So I track development throughout the river system and reach out to developers to talk to them about how they are treating the edge of the river with any new development. And really our goal is just that each new development, whether it be industrial or multifamily or mixed use, et cetera, that they all contribute positively to the river system and also help us implement our vision for the Blue-Green Corridor. So making sure that everyone is maintaining public access and green space along the river. We have a couple of tools that help us, regulatory tools that help us in this effort. Friends was very heavily involved in writing the City of Chicago's original waterways ordinance, which was adopted in 1983. And the waterways ordinance basically says that all properties or developments within 100 feet of the river have to go through a planned development process. And the planned development process just means that they have to go through a more detailed community outreach and engagement effort instead of just being a simple zoning change approval. They have to go through a more extensive process where they talk to friends and talk to other community groups about the development. And then along with the waterways ordinance, there were the original set of guidelines that were adopted in 1999. Actually, I think the original ones were adopted before that, but the original guidelines basically just set into motion the requirement for the 30-foot setback for all of these developments, and it had other requirements for public access and the original river trail. But last year, it's really great. There was a new set of guidelines, updated guidelines created and adopted in 2019, and this has completely changed the way that developers are required to address the river edge. There are many, many more resources in the guidelines and many more detailed requirements for the types of plantings, the location of plantings, the type of trail. There's requirements for lighting and for specific types of seating and habitat and many, many, many other things. And it's been a really great improvement. The new guidelines have a very useful checklist for developers, which helps them, understand upfront right away what the requirements are. And it's really made our job at Friends from an advocacy perspective much easier when working with developers. And all of that has really led to, I'm sure many of you have seen the transformation, especially in the downtown area, of the approach to the river, where, back before there were these ordinances and Friends advocacy, the river was really seen as a backdoor and was forgotten. But today it's become very clear that your location as a development or a building on a river is really, really important and really valuable for that development. So we're seeing in many cases developments going above and beyond even the requirements that there are today, and really creating beautiful park spaces and habitat and trails along the river. These are two pictures of some of the newer office buildings near Lake Street. At the confluence of the main branch, South Branch, and the North Branch of the Chicago River. And also another tool that I have that I used for talking to developers is I also run a committee of volunteer professionals called the Planning Committee. And on that committee, we have a bunch of experts who have a lot of experience working on construction projects and development and design projects along the river. We have landscape architects and civil engineers and other representatives from the community who know a lot about the history of the river. And we meet monthly to talk to developers and talk about development in general, and also take on other small projects related to river edge development. So our goal with all of that is really to be a resource for developers and a partner, and work in a collaborative manner. We think that's the most effective way to really advocate for better river edge developments is collaboratively. So the third strategy that I'm going to talk about is that related to Chicago River Trail. So this is something that we work very closely with partners on. This is a really great map that SOM, which is a planning and architecture firm in Chicago, created. But it just shows regionally there's many exciting trail systems already existing. But related to the Blue-Green Corridor, Friends' vision is really to create a connected trail system along the Chicago River. And there are bits and pieces in the city because of the Chicago River Waterways Ordinance requires a setback in the trail. So there's bits and pieces as time goes on, but we still haven't really created large sections of off-street trail along the river. And one of the areas that I think is especially interesting related to this is down in the southwest corner here of the region, there's the Palos Forest Preserves area, which makes up many forest preserves. But it's such a great regional natural resource for people and a recreational resource that I think this connection someday that could occur along the Ship Canal between the end of the Paseo Trail, which is currently being constructed, and the beginning of this further, more southwestern trails, such as the Cal-Sag Trail and the major Taylor trails. That connection between those two systems would be really amazing for our region, for all the people who live in this area to connect off street down to the Palos area, and vice versa for people who live in the southwest suburbs to be able to get downtown by riding along the river system would be really an amazing improvement. So that's one area that I'm really interested in. But also, connections from you know, from the lakefront to the river system, and from the upper North Branch, the North Shore Channel Trail and the North Branch Trail, which are very well used. Having those really connect further down into the city would be a great benefit for everyone. This is a map that Active Transportation Alliance made just specifically to the city, so it's a little bit more focused in. That shows some of the gaps existing still downtown. So there's obviously challenges with private property owners and other areas that are very, you know, where there's buildings right up against the river, there's real challenges. But we're always looking for opportunities to make those connections. So there's a lot of really interesting work going on with this. Related to that, Active Transportation Alliance a couple of years ago put together this strategy plan that really looks at each one of those gaps, and they did a community engagement process with that and really talks through some of those specific opportunities for closing the gaps in the city of Chicago's Chicago River Trail system. So one of the projects that Friends took on related to trails was last summer. I worked with the North River Commission and some other partners, the Park District, to put together a hands-on survey event that involved community members and members of Friends Tributary Committee, and other river people interested in the river issues, to do a walking and paddling survey of the Upper North Branch. So the Upper North Branch is the area northwest of River Park. And really this area is just starting to be understood for recreation and other improvements, because Friends was part of a coalition that worked with the Army Corps of Engineers to remove the Upper North Branch Dam, which was a barrier for fish passage and really wasn't a good thing for the health of the river. So that was just recently removed after many years of advocacy and work to get that project done. So now that dam is removed and this river portion is more naturalized, there's really a new understanding that this area could be really a new recreational opportunity. So the survey had, you know, over 45 participants on the day. We had participation with the local alderman and other community representatives, as well as residents and other people from the universities in the area. And they really got out in the river and surveyed and recorded information about each stretch. Some of the things that we saw during the survey, there's some challenges with retaining walls on private property in that area that are not in good shape. So there's quite a bit of decay you can see in some of these photos. There were some areas where there were what we call trash hotspots. Basically areas in the river that are collecting floatable trash and trapping them, so that's always a problem. One of the more persistent problems that the river faces. And then some of the areas of this stretch of the river also have a concrete lining that was put in originally to control erosion, and it was put in the same time as the original dam that was removed. So as we seek more naturalization of this area, one of the recommendations we would like to see is that the concrete lining eventually be removed and replaced with a more natural erosion control device. So all of those observations and recommendations were compiled into a plan that we shared with the Park District and MWD and others who have jurisdiction in this area. And we continue to work with all those people to try to implement some of the recommendations in this area. So that was a really fun project, just because it joined together public outreach and education, and also got people hands-on experience with the river. And it was a lot of fun to be out there on the day and it was a fun sort of survey, but we also got to gather a lot of really interesting data. So the fourth strategy really related to the blue-green corridor that I'm going to talk about is wildlife corridor connectivity planning. And this is a really critical issue, not only for our region, but throughout the globe. As our world becomes more urbanized, scientists and other experts who are experts in wildlife are really recognizing the role that urban areas play in habitat. And this is something that is just becoming more and more apparent as time goes by. There's this really interesting book called Win-Win Ecology by Michael Rosenzweig. He's an evolutionary ecologist. And he really wrote, the book is really about how the role that cities can play in protecting endangered species. And the approach that he promotes is really one that doesn't have to make sacrifices for people. It doesn't have to make sacrifices for wildlife, but both of those things can be considered together. And that's really one of the core things that our approach with the blue-green corridor tries to do, is to really connect benefits for people and wildlife together so they're balanced. And this is just gaining attention everywhere as we recognize that rural areas aren't really that great at supporting wildlife communities, especially like in Illinois, when you see that 75% of the land area outside of urban areas is really agricultural. And that's really not an environment that supports wildlife. And at the same time, our cities, because they're located at really important geographic locations, for example, City of Chicago is located at the location where the river meets the lake. That was a great thing for people, which is why we're all here. But it's also an important location for wildlife because of that same reason. And one of the ways to improve our urban community for wildlife is to really look at landscape permeability, which is kind of a fancy way of saying connectivity. And this is the concept that Mark Hauser talked about last week in his presentation in detail. But it's really, the concept gets at that wildlife needs to be able to connect to multiple areas of habitat to maintain their genetic diversity and their population sustainability in the long term. So in cities, that's the most challenging because many of the habitat areas in cities are what we call fragmented or disconnected. So that puts wildlife at risk because they don't have the ability to move to another habitat area when they need to. Because there might be barriers such as roadways or high traffic areas or development that get in the way. So one of the ways to improve that is to expand connectivity, wildlife habitat connectivity throughout the city. So right now we're taking on a connectivity planning effort, and we just finished our Chicago River Wildlife Conservation and Landscape Restoration Framework Plan. And this plan really is focused on identifying specific opportunities throughout the city that we can employ through friends and our partners' projects to improve connectivity for wildlife and therefore improve their success and protect endangered species in our region. So the strategies we're looking at are really specific to different areas of the city. So we've identified these urban density types where there are specific strategies for each. So for example, in the urban core, so downtown Chicago, there's very different approach to habitat connectivity. And those really would involve things like green roofs and bird-friendly design for buildings and doing native plantings in streetscapes. But in contrast to that, in areas such as the suburbs, there may be different types of strategies and different opportunities. So in the suburbs, there's a lot of organizations looking at utility corridors and how those can be planted with native plants and vegetation to support wildlife movement. And there may be things like golf courses that were traditionally heavily manicured, but there might be opportunities on those golf courses for naturalization projects, so that the golf courses could also serve an ecological benefit for the region. So we're working right now to identify those types of opportunities, and also in the map on the left here, you can see we're starting to identify weak points by using the many layers that we have through our public lands assessment tool. We've been identifying habitat hubs in the region along the river system, as well as, you know, where there's weak spots where we can see that there's a real lack of connectivity. And also more broadly identifying major barriers, so such as the transportation system and how that relates to the river and the river-related wildlife habitat areas, and contributes to barriers. So that the framework plan is really just the first stage in this project. We're going to be continuing to work on this, and really the next step is to take everything, all the data and mapping and everything we've gathered for this initial framework plan, and talk to our partners who are real experts. We're going to put together workshops, interactive workshops with biologists and experts in urban wildlife, and talk to them about our strategies. And really the goal for the final outcome of this project is to identify an action list that we can incorporate into both Friends' strategic plan and our planning for on-the-ground projects, but also work with our partners to do broader efforts for habitat connectivity projects throughout the system. So last but not least, that's the final strategy I'm going to talk about is nature-based solutions for stormwater. So stormwater is, I think everybody can see that there are more and more frequent damaging storm events. Just recently, I think, you know, the tornado that touched down in Rogers Park was really sort of interesting to see. And the city estimated that they lost over 7,000 trees in that single storm event. And these are really things that we're seeing a broader trend of increase related to the climate crisis. And there's tons of research and data about showing how our region is really changing. Initial data is showing that, you know, the spring and summer months are becoming, the spring and winter months are becoming much more wet, and there's much more rainfall, especially in shorter periods of time. So there's much more damaging storm events. And we're seeing greater frequency of flash flooding, and all those things are really putting at risk some of the improvements we've made to the river system over Friends' time working on advocacy for the river. You can see, you know, in these photos, all the investments that went into the river rock are just, you know, continuing to be put at risk through these more frequent rain events. And there's also, we know that everything that happens on land eventually is just one rainstorm away from washing into the river. So the greater frequency of high volume storm events really puts at risk water quality issues as well. So Friends really sees that a big part of the solution to those issues is really nature-based solutions, and improving our natural areas as they serve for stormwater infiltration. And this diagram we just used to illustrate the point that there's a really huge difference. So if you think about your turf lawn, if you have a yard, really doesn't capture that much stormwater. Even though it's a green thing, it really contributes more to runoff. Whereas if in that same area, if you plant it with native plants, which have deep root systems, they're able to capture and pull that water into the ground instead of having it run off into the river. Native plants also do a really great job of capturing contaminants and keeping them out of our waterways, so they're a really important part of the picture. And there's really great advantages to having a more decentralized type stormwater system. So heavy gray infrastructure is really important. So gray infrastructure are things like pipes and tunnels and treatment plants. These play a really important role in protecting water quality of our region, but they're never going to be enough. And they also have a very high upfront cost and long-term maintenance costs. Whereas things in the more green infrastructure zone, these bottom two strategies, are much easier to take on, and they decentralize the approach. So meaning that they can be all over the region and capturing water and pulling it away instead of channelizing water into one location and causing damage. And really the lowest upfront cost thing is to protect the land that we already have. So protecting open space, making sure that our forest preserves are protected and stewarded, and expanding those areas to adjacent public areas is really the easiest way to collect stormwater. And then the second easiest way is to do more constructed type green infrastructure projects, which involves bioswales, which are basically water collection channels that incorporate native plants and other landscapes that collect stormwater along streets and in parking lots. Things like that are really a really important part of our overall approach to protecting ourselves from damaging stormwater events. So One Thing's Friends is taking on more recently is creating a broader collaboration between all the groups in our region that already do interesting work related to green infrastructure. So this is a bunch of different plans up on the screen from everyone from MWD, Calumet Stormwater Collaborative. The City of Chicago has a really great stormwater ordinance and green stormwater infrastructure strategy, CNT, and many, many others. CMAP are doing really exciting work related to green infrastructure. But we do see that there's really a need for bigger efforts. And all of these organizations are really limited to the area of their expertise and the area of their control. Very recently, Friends formed this collaborative council called the Chicago River Watershed Council. We had our initial kickoff meeting in July. It involves a diverse group of land management agencies, such as the Forest Preserves and the Park District, and then also the agencies that manage our water, such as MWRD and the city. So our concept for this collaboration is really to work together to identify ways to share resources related to nature-based solutions so that we can create bigger projects that have greater impacts for stormwater capture. So we're really excited about this. So please stay tuned for further updates. I'm sure we'll be continuing through our blog and through our newsletters to update everyone on how we progress on that effort. So that concludes my overview of the Blue-Green Corridor. Feel free to start asking questions in the chat box if anything popped into your head. I'd love to be able to hear your thoughts on this. And then while those questions are rolling in, hopefully through the chat, I'll just introduce briefly our next upcoming presentation as part of the My Chicago River Day Summer Challenge series. And the next one is going to be on climate change, and that's going to be, again, Mark Hauser from Friends team is going to do that presentation, and that's on Saturday, September 12th at the same time. So please visit our website on the events page to sign up for that. It'll be a really interesting deeper dive into climate change and all those challenges related to the river system. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate everyone participating in this presentation series, and just keep an eye out on Friends events page on our website for future opportunities.